I'm Magda Wierzycka, CEO of Signia, and this is a Wealth Nations podcast with Yolanda.
Okay, that's one of our goals with the podcast, is to educate women on simple concepts, make it as basic as possible. You go ahead.
So I'll get there. So let me go through the 7 points, and then, I'm very happy to kind of do the education bit.
Sure.
Then the next step is to start taking savings, seriously, and particularly if you are in your 20s. So there is nothing more powerful. There are 2 very powerful concepts when it comes to saving. One is time and compound interest.
Okay.
It just means that, the earlier you start saving, the less you need to save to retire with, a huge amount of money, because you start earning performance on performance every single year. And that is a very, very powerful investment concept. So, if you're in your 20s and you save 2,000 Rand a month, you can retire with a couple of million at the age of 65. If you only started to save when you are 45 to retire with the same 2 million Rand, you would have to save about 10,000 Rand a month. That's how powerful time is.
Okay.
So it's never too early to start.
Yes.
And it's never too early to start even with a small sum of money. Then the next element of saving is fees that you pay.
Yes.
That's the other controllable factor. And, again, using very simple statistics. But if you can reduce your fees by 2%, so, standard fee once you've added in the savings product and the administration fees and the investments, you're looking at a fee in South Africa of about 2.5% per annum that you're paying away of your savings in various fees. If you can reduce that to just 0.5%, which is completely doable. So there are products on offer, investment products, with savings products wrapped on top of them. For 0.5% per annum, you will retire with kind of a savings pot, which is 65% larger than you would retire otherwise.
Okay.
And that's just a simple decision of switching from, something expensive to something cheap.
More affordable, yes.
So that's the other thing. The next thing is, one of my very important lessons was, as much as I talk about, it's never too early to invest or save, how much should you save and how should you do it? When I started working at the age of 22, I have rigorously put away 20% of my salary into my retirement fund.
Wow.
And I've never touched it. But the way I did it and the discipline I introduced was right up front to think about my salary as being 20% smaller. So I never, when I was earning 2,000 Rand, I never thought of it as 2,000 Rand. I always thought about it as 1,600.
Wow.
That's how in my head, that's how much I was earning.
That's real discipline, especially nowadays. Everybody wants to buy this, go to a concert, eat out. So that takes discipline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's perfectly fine, but you've got, live within your means. So live within the 1,600 Rand, not 2,000 Rand.
Okay.
So the moment you start thinking about, this is your savings, this is your spending pool.
Yeah.
It makes it so much simpler than if you think about, well, I'm actually earning 2,000 Rand. So, I've got 2,000 Rand to play around with. And, the reason that is so key critical is that, think of it this way. Everybody today, never mind in their 20s, but even people in their 30s and 40s are going to live for at least 10 years longer than your parents.
Yes, of course.
And people in their 20s are going to live for 20 years longer than their parents. Now, think about your parents and think about the financial position that they are in, because there are very, very few people in South Africa that have retired with sufficient savings and who are not in some way dependent on their children. Yes. So imagine yourself, fast forward 40 years from now.
Yeah.
And the fact that, at 65, you're still going to live for, say, 30 to 40 years.
Yeah.
And how are you going to support yourself?
Exactly. So a lot of planning.
So, if the discipline doesn't work for you, then fear should.
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody needs
a fire under the ass to get them going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
So, if it's not about discipline, it should be about fear.
All right.
And just think of the fact that, if you don't have kids now, do you really want to live a life where you are going to be dependent on your children?
Yeah, of course.
So that's the other thing.
Okay.
The next thing is learn how to budget. And, even if, just so that you actually understand every month how you're spending your money. And, there are lots of apps, free apps that you can download.
Yeah.
And that you can look at. And, just enter your expenses into that app. And within 6 months, of doing it rigorously, you will figure out where your money is going. And most people, if they introduce, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life. You just need to do it for a window of time that makes you understand yourself and how you spend money.
Okay.
Because the moment you understand,
where your money,
you will understand yourself better. You'll be able to save. You will suddenly discover that you're spending money on a whole lot of unnecessary things. And actually, if you want to buy that handbag that you've been hankering after, just by cutting out that, after work drinks that you keep buying for everybody.
Yeah.
Because you go, for a drink and you think it doesn't actually cost a lot because it's like 20 rand, but actually,
it all adds
suddenly
up.
you discover
that
all these things add up.
Of course.
These little things. The fact that suddenly you go to Woolies or to Pick and Pay and you buy food. And as all of us, our eyes are usually much bigger than our stomachs. So we overshop.
Of course.
And then you start throwing food away.
Yeah, it's wasting.
So what a waste, So teach yourself the discipline of how much are you over shopping by. And don't waste food. Rather go twice to the shop.
Yeah, then buy volume.
Going once and over buying. So it's that kind of this budgeting process is a very valuable tool for learning about yourself.
But how do you do it though? Cost of living is so high. You have the kids and then emergency comes along. How do you do it?
So genuinely download an app and every single month, you know how much you're going to spend on your rental or on your, bond repayment. You know how much you're paying in terms of your transport costs. You know how much you're paying for your school fees. There's certain expenditure items that they're not an unexpected expense.
Yeah.
So that's not where you are suddenly going to discover massive saving. It's in all that extras. It's if you look at your bank statement, the big ticket items obviously stand out.
Yeah.
And you know exactly how much they are. And you kind of budgeted for them. It's that other 20% that disappears into 100 different transactions.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Which you have never, catered for. And then what everybody should always have, two other things.
Yes.
One is have an emergency savings pool of money. Something like 2 months worth of salary that you've scrambled and scratched around and then put aside and forgotten about. And that's your emergency fund.
Okay.
So when the unexpected event happens, whatever it might be, you at least know at the back of your mind that you've got an emergency 2 months worth of savings pot sitting there. And it gives you a lot of optionality, it buys you a lot of time. In this economy, given how many people are losing their jobs, for instance, it suddenly gives you that breathing room. So you don't have to panic.
Yeah.
So 2 months worth of salary, scramble and scrimp and save and put it away as your emergency fund.
Okay.
And then in terms of your children, I'll tell you one thing, if you save a couple of thousand rand a month during the first 3 years of your child's life, but literally as they born, you put 2,000 rand away into a tax-free savings account.
Yeah.
Then by the age of 18, that money, so you've saved for only 3 years, that money would have accumulated to a sum large enough to pay for the best university education that you might want for your child.
Any specific fund that you're advising us to invest in within the tax-free investment?
Okay, so let's talk about funds and let's talk about savings. So let's talk about savings products first, as a kind of broad category.
Okay.
They're not that complicated.
Yeah.
When you look at there are 3 types of ways of saving pre-retirement that are most important. There are some other, more complicated structures, but really for most people, all you need to know is the following.
Yeah.
That you can save, the first amount of money that you save should go into a tax-free savings account.
Of course.
So every year, you're allowed to put 33,000 Rand into a tax-free saving account. And you can do it for yourself. You can do it for every child you have. And, the sooner the better.
Yes.
And that money, it comes from, after-tax savings, but that money remains. So you can, over your lifetime, contribute 500,000 Rand to a tax-free savings account.
Okay.
Whatever accumulates in that tax-free savings account is never taxed.
Okay.
It grows completely tax-free.
Even upon withdrawal, right?
On withdrawals, you can access it at any time. It's completely liquid.
Yeah.
You just, once you've accessed it, you can't replenish it.
Yes.
So, your limit, your cap in terms of contributions is 500,000 Rand over your lifetime. Yes. And obviously, if you withdraw from that fund, it's not like that gets deducted from the 500,000 ceiling.
Yep.
Your contribution stays what it was.
I understand.
But the very fact that your money accumulates on a completely tax-free basis makes it a wonderful savings vehicle for most people.
Yeah.
Because before we go into organized saving, this kind of disorganized savings world, above the 33,000 Rand, which not a lot of people have on an annual basis to save to begin with.
Yeah.
Particularly, if you look across a family. Sits, just money, which is, it's kind of called the discretionary savings, but it's basically, you go straight into unit trust. So there's no savings product sitting above the actual investment vehicle. And we'll talk about investment vehicles just now. We're talking about the layer above the savings products. Okay. So you can invest in tax-free savings account, or you can eliminate a savings vehicle and go directly into the investment fund.
Okay.
The other side of savings has to do with your literally organized retirement planning type savings products, which offer tax benefits in the sense that your contribution to that savings product is deductible from tax.
Yes.
If you're working for a company, 99% of the time, they will have a retirement fund of some sort in place already for all the employees.
Yes.
And they typically give you an option of contributing anything from 13% of your income to 17.5% of your income, sometimes higher, towards the retirement fund that the company offers.
Yes.
And you should always take it up. You usually don't have a choice, by the way.
Okay.
You usually have to invest, if it's part of your contract of employment.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you are self-employed, so you don't have an employer who's providing you with that savings product in the form of a retirement fund, then what you do is you invest in a retirement annuity.
Annuity, okay.
Which is like your own little retirement fund.
Which has the same tax implications.
Which has the same tax benefits.
Provident fund,
so your contributions are tax deductible.
Yes.
So although you will be taxed, at the age of 65, when you retire, the money switches over into a different product. During your lifetime, you're benefiting from the fact that, the contributions you make come from before tax income.
Okay.
So it's a much bigger contribution.
I understand.
And then it grows, it's that compound return on return, compounding effect that kicks in.
Okay.
So this is your world before retirement. This is the kind of savings vehicles available to you. Now drop a level below. Okay, once you've chosen your savings wrapper, how do you invest your money? What do you invest?
Tell us about that.
And so for most people, outside of, and we'll talk about, retirement funds just now offered by companies, but whether you choose a tax-free savings account or a retirement annuity, or you go direct, the investment vehicle that you will save through is a unit trust.
Yes.
Now, a unit trust is nothing more than, it's a legal structure, it's a fund
Okay.
But it's a very tightly regulated fund, because these are funds offered by asset managers to the members of the public. So there's a huge amount of regulatory controls and compliance around how these funds are run. But very simplistically, these funds enable an asset manager such as Signia to take as little as 500 Rand a month from many individuals, and to invest that money in one pool of assets.
Yes.
And then to manage that one pool of assets. So, from our perspective, when you think about people on the ground who actually have to invest the money into shares or into bonds or into internationally, it's so much easier to manage one pool.
Yes.
And not itsy bitsy amounts of money.
Yeah.
So a unit trust is effectively a pooled kind of fund.
Okay.
And what you buy in that fund is you buy units.
Okay.
So as new investors invest in the fund, more units are issued. It's almost like shares in a company, units in a unit trust.
So how do we make money though?
Okay. Each unit has equal value.
Okay.
So every investor, you might own fewer units or more units in the unit trust, depends on how much money you invested, but every single unit is valued at exactly the same price. Now that price changes depending on what the underlying investments do. Now, what happens within the unit trust? That very much depends on the mandate or the strategy of the unit trust. And that strategy, again, it's not very complicated. There is only a limited range of financial instruments that an asset manager has at his disposal or her disposal.
Okay.
And those are, you can invest in shares of companies. So, it is everything from Anglo-American to shares of Billiton to shares of Pick and Pay to shares of Discovery.
Anything listed on the JSE?
Anything listed on the JSE.
Okay.
Effective.
Okay.
Not risk-free, as we have learned with Steinhoff. So sometimes these companies are, or Tonga Hewlett in Durban.
Yeah.
But shares of companies.
Okay.
So that's one. And, that investment is probably in the context of making an investment decision, the most significant decision that the asset manager makes and the investor makes. And the reason is that over time, and you always have to look at it over time, shares are the financial instruments that are most volatile. They move up and down, from day to day.
Yes.
But at the same time, they are also the financial instruments that over, 5-year period, 10-year period, 15-year period, unless something, really unexpected happens, like a stock market crash.
Okay.
Which is 1 in 1,000 events. Those are the financial instruments that will deliver the most growth, so the highest return. But your journey there to that end destination will not be a smooth ride.
Yeah.
So it makes people nervous. And that's why, shares are considered high risk. And risk is mainly a term used for daily volatility of the price.
Okay.
We're going to ignore Steinhoffs and Tonga Hewletts because, frauds only happen, rarely and occasionally.
Yeah.
But for most shares, prices of shares go up and down depending on what crazy Donald Trump tweets.
Okay.
I'm bombing Iran.
Yeah.
Everyone pulls their money out of stock markets.
Yeah.
Shares drop.
Yeah.
Next day he tweets, I want to make a deal with Iran. Okay, it's back to the party. Everyone is happy. So there's a lot of sentiment-driven, emotion-driven stuff that's expressed in the daily prices of shares, which actually has nothing to do with how well the company is doing. Over time, the daily noise disappears, and what you get is growth. So shares are one instrument.
Yes.
And, for anyone young, they should maximize the amount of investments, say long-term savings, that they have invested in shares. That should be your maximum. If you're in your 20s or in your 30s, you should invest the maximum you can in shares.
Okay.
Because you've got a long-term time horizon. It's not your 1 month savings, long-term time horizon, and you want to achieve maximum growth.
Okay.
Then the next instrument that you can invest in, and again, this is not a unlimited range. This is actually a very limited range of instruments. Next financial instrument has to do with something called bonds.
Yes.
And bonds are nothing more than IOUs.
Yeah.
So if I, and they effectively are pieces of paper which are exchanged between two parties. One party lends the other one money at a particular interest rate. Now, who borrows money from investors? The government.
Of course.
ESCOM. Pick and Pay.
And now I think you're going to scare our listeners as soon as you said ESCOM.
ESCOM. But ESCOM,
yeah,
because they are what they are, and they are in the crisis that they're in, also have to pay a higher interest rate. So government will pay you the lowest interest rate.
Yeah.
Because, they're not going to default on you lending them your money.
Yeah.
ESCOM probably isn't going to default, but there's that question mark. So they actually have to pay a higher interest rate.
Okay.
Pick and Pay has to pay a higher interest rate because, corporates, companies are borrowing money.
Okay.
Have to pay more.
Understand.
Just because.
Because, all right.
Anything could happen. I'm not for a second suggesting Pick and Pay is a Steinhoff, but
just
there is that
example.
other undefined risk sitting behind the scenes. So it's unlikely that government will default, but a company might. African Bank did.
Yes.
So that is what bonds are.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the other jargon for it is fixed interest instruments.
Okay.
Now, clearly, those instruments also trade. So although, at the point of inception, it's an exchange of money and, someone gives you an IOU saying, thank you very much, you've lent me money. I'm due to repay that money in 10 years' time. And in the meantime, I'll pay you X, I'll pay you 10% interest. That's your investment instrument.
Okay.
Asset managers can invest right at inception, but also once they've invested in that instrument, they can trade it. They can sell that bond to somebody else.
All right.
Provided the price is good enough. Okay. So there is what's called a secondary market. So second-hand market. Think of it as second-hand clothes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right at inception, you're buying your clothes from the designer.
Yeah.
And from a shop, and they're brand new. But after 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, you might want to sell your beautiful dress to someone else because you've worn it to that wedding.
Yeah.
And and you might sell it for more than what you bought it for.
Okay.
Depends. You can put it on eBay.
Yeah.
Sell it for more. The same thing applies to bonds.
Oh,
you can buy and sell them.
Okay, perfect.
Over time, and the price varies.
But it's only asset managers that can do this.
Yes, practically yes.
Okay.
It's just because bonds typically trade in quite big amounts, so kind of R1 million. And so it works to trade bonds within a pooled vehicle like a unit trust, where you've got a lot of small investors' money. So your fund is actually quite big, and you can buy individual bonds.
Yeah.
For individual investors, it's you can't really buy. Theoretically you can, but not really. For you and me, not really. Okay. We will invest in a unit trust. Okay. So the manager buys bonds, they buy shares, and then the next sector. They really fall. The easiest one is cash, just holding money in the bank in cash. That's also an option for asset managers.
That's any currency, not just rands.
So we'll talk about overseas investments just now.
All right.
This applies to South African shares bonds and overseas shares bonds. It's a big universe out there, in practice. And then the fourth segment is property. And again, it's very unlikely these days that any asset manager would invest in physical property. So no one is going to buy an office building. Mm-hmm. They invest in companies, again, listed on the JSE, but very specific companies. Those companies invest in shopping malls. Okay. And they invest in corporate buildings. And, so you get kind of exposure to property, not by buying a piece of a building, which you can't sell. Yeah. It's by buying shares in a company, which buys the property, and hence you can trade the shares.
Okay, perfect. So those are
So
the
you know,
four
there's
asset classes. Okay.
And now you look at South Africa, which is teeny tiny place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it really is, a stock market is teeny tiny.
Yeah.
And, you know, projected exponentially. And the world is a very big place with many stock markets. I mean, JSE is small, you know, it's a pinprick.
Yeah.
We've got stock exchanges in London, in New York, in Frankfurt, in Amsterdam, in Japan, in Tokyo, you know, in Shanghai. Big stock exchanges, much bigger than JSE could ever aspire to be, with many more shares listed.
Yeah.
So in theory, you know, your universe of what you can invest in is very wide. Now, as an asset manager, and now living in South Africa, we do live in this world of protecting the rand, and hence, you know, we are only allowed to take X percentage of the money overseas every year. So just like South Africa can only take R1 million, you know, that's your foreign exchange allowance.
Yeah.
So if you travel on a credit card, your bank monitors quite close. You know, not a lot of people have R1 million to spend on overseas travel.
Yeah.
But that's a ceiling imposed on individual South Africans. So if you travel a lot overseas, the maximum that you can spend a year is R1 million in US dollars. So, you know, convert rands into US dollars. Similar thing applies within retirement funds and within unit trusts.
Okay.
So you can invest, but this is where it gets interesting, and it's worth noting. So a retirement fund, you know, that your employer will offer you, or a retirement annuity, because there are all these tax breaks, government kind of has a say about how your money is invested.
Yes.
The main say that they have, because they're giving you tax breaks.
Yes.
They try to do two things. One is protect yourself from yourself.
Okay.
And the other one, and from stupidity. And the other one is to limit the amount of money that, you know, South Africans can take offshore, just in case everybody takes everything offshore.
Yeah.
So within retirement fund savings vehicles, the maximum amount that you can invest in equities, in shares, is 75%.
Okay.
The maximum amount that you can invest overseas is 30% of your portfolio.
Okay.
So that's how your strategy is structured, which basically means that it kind of protects you from yourself.
But
it also makes it really...
Sorry, essentially though, you could take your tax-free savings, because you're not limited. You don't have Regulation 28 on that. You can put all of that offshore.
Exactly.
And
exactly. So now...
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the moment you take it away from these very specific saving for retirement vehicles to a tax-free savings account, or to money that you skip the savings products and you invest directly into unit trusts. So no tax breaks, but also no restrictions.
Okay.
Then you can invest in any product you wish. Okay. And these limits of 30% they still apply to financial services companies.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, they apply not at individual unit trust level, they apply at the company level. So our unit trust company can take 30% of its assets overall overseas. So as a consequence, we can launch some funds which are only domestic, they only invest in South Africa, and some funds which only 100% invest internationally.
All right.
As long as the company as a whole doesn't take more than 30% offshore.
Okay, so that's a limit on asset managers.
So that's on the company.
Yeah.
But for you as an investor, it completely works, because if you wanted to, you can invest 100% of your money in an offshore unit trust, and your money is taken offshore and invested offshore.
Yeah. But then you have those taxes that you got to pay.
So that's how.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's how, you can exploit the fact that in a tax-free savings account or indirect savings into a unit trust, no such restrictions apply.
Okay.
And you can choose 100% offshore vehicle. But always remember that, you live in South Africa, and South Africa has a higher rate. So all things being equal, and let's discount all the political craziness. Yeah. And let's assume we have a normal economy.
Okay.
With no political noise.
Yeah.
Then, in a normal world, And then you can adjust your thinking accordingly. But in a normal world, because we live in an economy which in theory should be growing faster, which it isn't, but in theory should be, because we are an emerging market. And in theory, and our inflation is higher than inflation overseas. So, we are sitting at around 4.6%, whereas overseas they struggle to reach 2%. And in some countries you have negative inflation. And consequently, the returns that companies will generate, if you just think simplistically about annual price increases that Discovery levies on your premium.
Okay.
Because inflation is so much higher in South Africa, they will always increase their premiums by inflation plus.
Inflation plus, yeah.
So you see, if they were, if they were in the United States, they would only be able to increase their premiums every year by 1.5%.
Yeah.
In South Africa, they increase by 7 or 8%.
Yeah.
So increasing their premiums by 7 or 9%. I'm simplifying this whole thing, but it's not, it's not a huge leap of simplification.
Okay.
That means that their profits automatically grow by 7 to 8%.
I understand.
Because they've just increased what they take from you.
Okay.
Which means that companies in South Africa should deliver higher returns than companies overseas.
But they don't.
Simplistic. But they don't. All things being equal.
Yeah.
So if we didn't have the political noise, if we haven't had, the 10 years of crazy Jacob Zuma regime, if we had a thriving economy, as we should have,
yes,
then this is what you would be looking at.
Okay.
But even so, and despite the noise, we often forget that, for international, that our share prices are often not a function of what's happening in South Africa, and not even a function of our economy or necessarily a function of a political system. It's mostly, and strangely enough, a function of what foreign investors want to do with their money at a point in time.
Yeah.
And foreign investors really don't spend a lot of time thinking about South Africa. If you are so a foreign investor is the same asset manager, except that he works on Wall Street, and he catches a train to work every morning.
Okay.
And he reads his newspaper, and all that he's interested in is the performance of the US economy, which is still the largest economy in the world, and the US stock market. And somewhere there is like a crazy little headline which says, Zuma to not testify at Zonda.
Yeah.
And he reads the headline. He doesn't have the time to read the article and goes, oh my God, okay, craziness in South Africa again. Sell all my shares. If I own any shares, he phones, his dealer back at the office, literally on his cell phone, and says, whatever we have in South Africa, sell.
Yeah.
Sell. Just with the headline. But similarly, in periods such as we've just experienced over the last 10 years, over the last 10 years since the global financial crisis, internationally, interest rates, banks have dropped interest rates to virtually zero.
Okay.
And the thinking was that dropping interest rates to zero will mean that people borrow money, spend money, and hence the economy, kickstart the economy.
Yeah.
And some of the money definitely was spent that way, but not a lot. A lot of money was borrowed at 0% interest rates and deployed again or invested in countries like South Africa. Why? Because our government needs to pay close to 9% on the bonds that they issue. Okay. So if you can borrow at zero and invest in something that pays you guaranteed 9 or 10%, whatever it might be,
it's a sweet deal.
Then you would do it all the time.
Yeah.
The same applied to all the riskier economies. So that's typically, riskier economies are typically defined as emerging markets.
Yeah.
So it's everything from, India and Brazil and Malaysia and Turkey and South Africa, and absolutely everything that isn't United States, United Kingdom, that isn't situated in Europe.
Yeah.
And that isn't Australia, Canada, United States.
First world.
So, as a consequence, a lot of money actually poured into emerging markets, including South Africa, despite Zuma.
Okay.
And hence, both are bond markets. Obviously, if there's excess demand, prices go up. So our share prices went up, our bonds went up because there was this
So much
constant
yeah.
flow of money.
Yeah.
So, as a consequence, actually what happens to your share portfolio, what happens to your, bond holdings is much more a function of what foreigners are doing.
And what's happening.
And foreign investors control huge pool of money.
Yeah.
What South Africa is doing.
Okay.
And hence, you've had 10 years of fantastic returns.
Okay.
And the last 2 years have been quite tough.
Dismal, yeah.
Because a lot of money has been withdrawn out of South Africa for a variety of kind of economic reasons. Again, global reasons, not South Africa specific reasons.
Okay.
And that just goes to how much money should you invest overseas and how much money should you invest domestically. So because you live in South Africa and subject to South African inflation, do not take like 100% of your money offshore. That's not wise.
All right. Thank you so much, Magda. Thank you for your time. Our time is up for today. All right. Thank you so much, Magda. You've been really great today. So much of good information. And we'll let you know when we...
Hopefully it was useful.
Thank you so much.